plea. Let's get to our politically incorrect former radio king at night time across Australia, Jim Ball. Jim, welcome back to TNT Radio.
Yeah, hi, Chris. Just listening to Alan there, I thought, gee, this is like a class reunion.
Yeah.
Listen, on Russell Brand.
Yeah.
Look, I want to play prosecution and defence, if I may.
Yeah.
But just on that thing with the British Parliament, we've got to remind ourselves, Britain was the home of the Magna Carta of 1215, which recognises and protects the liberty of the individual and that everybody's got the right to a fair trial with a jury.
Yeah.
Now, where does that fit into all of this? But look, for the prosecution, I've only ever been like most people, I guess, of my vintage, your vintage, a casual drive-by observer of this character. And to lay my cards on the table, I've always found him to be quite creepy, revolting. And so none of this really surprises. Now, as I say, I'm playing prosecution here. I mean, everything about him, from his what they call mockery accent, that is a mock Cockney accent, to his unkempt dress, the hair, the entire image that he projects, to me, he comes across as an absolute sleaze and a kind of a menacing Rasputin type of character, and I've never understood the appeal. To be honest,
these are very
women.
These are very, very serious allegations. There's a story on 60 Minutes last night featuring another woman with a horror story to tell.
Yeah.
I'm not making any judgment because I actually reckon if these are serious allegations, we've got to take it one step further.
Absolutely. No,
I agree. Put it in front
of
of a judge, don't we?
As an overview of what just my observations of the guy, I've never taken a fancy to him. But there are a couple of threads to this touching on what you were just saying. And none of what he's accused of was any secret. It was enabled by many, been known about for years,
including the BBC.
That's right. And apparently, as I said, his behaviour was widely known, and there's a lot of pearl clutching and moral panic with the talking heads on television with their pearls of wisdom. For the media, it's a case of, and this is where I come into the defence now, the case of guilt by allegation, guilt by accusation, even before it gets anywhere near a court. The entire circus, it's reminiscent really of Alice in Wonderland, where the Queen says, sentence first, verdict afterwards. That's what it's reminiscent of.
It is.
It certainly sounds like there's a lot of things out of Alice in Wonderland combined with George Orwell. We go, and this is an example of that, verdict first, sentence afterwards, or whatever it is, accusation afterwards, or whatever. A lot of these old books are coming back, but the whole thing, it certainly sounds like he was the most crass and the most obnoxious predator type, and all around the most dreadful of people. And of course, you weave into all of this now. The other thread to it is this business with YouTube, and now the US Parliament weighing in. You've got advertisers pulling out of Rumble. I think I can't think of the names of big. We're talking big advertisers pulling out of Rumble because they're trying to exert pressure on them to take him down. He deserves his day in court.
Yeah,
simple. It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
And remember, these events, and they do say, why now? Well, this is the other thread. One of the other threads is the timing of all of this. Why now? 20 years later, he's starting to talk out against all those political, philosophical shibboleths and the nailing his colours to the mast on things. He's basically been red-pilled. That's what it comes down to. He's no longer, or whether this is just part of seeking attention, he's certainly coming across as no longer the lefty, the renegade. He's nailing his colours to the mast on things like masks and the vaccines and you name it, transgender, all the woke ideologies, COVID vaccination, military.
And I just wonder whether they've cancelled him as hard as they have because of that. I'm not suggesting that the allegations don't exist or are worth pursuing and prosecuting, but I'm just saying I wonder whether they've come down on him super hard because of his stance on these issues.
Well, when you think that he's got, 100 million, he's an influencer. Whether he's very clever, very funny, whatever, my opinion doesn't matter. He is an influencer, but like Joe Rogan, what he says matters.
Yeah.
And, like talking about as all of those things we just mentioned, plus the war in Ukraine. So he's got to be banned, silenced, cancelled, ostracized from polite society. It's a bit like Donald Trump. Now, prior to him being in politics, he was a rock star. Everybody from all sides loved him. Soon as he came into politics as a Republican, whoa, stand back. Yeah. And it's the same kind of thing.
Mm. I want to talk to you about this Australian all-party delegation, which will soon return back to Australia tomorrow, I hear, after their trip to Washington to plead on behalf of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Will Biden remain resolute on this? Is this just a waste of time, do you think?
Don't know, to be honest. I mean, presently he's in Belmarsh Prison in London. And when you consider all the criminality and the corruption that's gone on in the US at all levels from Biden down, the idea that they dare to lecture anyone on state secrets and propriety is absolutely preposterous. Yeah. Biden, for example, admits to using US loan guarantees to leverage Ukraine to fire a prosecutor in order to protect his son. Then we have this Mendez character across the weekend who was raided recently by the FBI. They discovered gold bars, $500,000 in cash, and a Merc, courtesy of the Egyptian government. So it's a bit rich for them to take the high moral ground on state secrets. Now, there is an angle to this that no one, and I mean no one, is talking about. I wrote to Alex Antic on the weekend, emailed him. Whether he gets it or not, I don't know. I mentioned it to Dick Smith some months ago about what I'm about to explain. And here's the point of where I think Assange may be able to take some comfort. Back in 1971, the New York Times started to publish what became known as the classified Pentagon Papers, right? These were the history of the American military involvement in Vietnam, and they were leaked to the Times by a guy called Daniel Ellsberg. He was the leaker. The Times was the publisher. Now, a court order was issued for the Times to cease and desist, and the entire thing ended up in the Supreme Court. For his part, Ellsberg gets murkier because he was charged with conspiracy and theft and espionage and all the rest of it. But that all got caught up with the plumbers in the Watergate affair, and the charges were eventually dismissed. But the Supreme Court, SCOTUS, in a landmark decision, found that the Times, as a publisher, had First Amendment rights under freedom of the press to publish. Now, fast forward to today, and to me, the similarities are striking. Assange was not the leaker. Assange, like the New York Times, in that case, was the publisher.
Yeah.
And again, to me, the cases are identical. The precedent has been created.
Good point.
Within that context of that leaker versus the publisher nexus. And Assange, as the publisher, not the leaker, should therefore be afforded the same First Amendment right and privileges to publish as was the New York Times.
You need to get onto his legal team. That's what you need to do.
I mean, I've read, as I said, I wrote on the weekend, and I was banging, when I was back on GB, I was banging on about, in another context, it wasn't to do with Assange, but I've been banging on his behalf, because I think, look, everything what he did, he published, just like the New York Times published. Yeah. So he should be given a break.
Okay. One last one. I see that Pope Francis wants migrants to be allowed into the territory of richer countries. Of course, Italy's swamped at the moment. He says, where does they come, as you'd expect from a pope? I don't think we need borders at all, do we, Jim?
Oh, well, that's the George Soros. This is what open society is all about. Look, Ronald Reagan most famously said, a nation that cannot control its borders is not a nation. And that's the objective.
Yeah.
Now, I think, as we all know, the Pope Francis, he's a rabid lefty who thinks nothing of imposing and inserting himself into political matters. And this is just another example. I mean, you've got 120 acres in the Vatican. Everyone's Catholic, so much for diversity. And he's demanding the West welcome illegal migrants. Yes. Now, it's so typical of the left, you know. Look at what's happening. It happened last year, Martha's Vineyard in the US up on the northeast coast. A couple of busloads of illegals were dispatched there by Ron DeSantis from Florida in the supposed sanctuary city of New York. Yeah. Only last week, they've all changed their tune. Oh, the horror of it all.
Yeah.
Gate crashing illegal aliens for thee, but not for me seems to be the principle. And just one more thing on this, apart from America, in Europe last week, it all started their way back with Angela Merkel, but last week, We had like thousands, tens of thousands of people from North Africa lobbying on Lampedusa, outnumbering the locals. This is an Italian territory, Italian island. And the Prime Minister, the President, whatever she is, can't think of a name, but anyway, you know who I'm talking about. It's done nothing.
Yeah.
Douglas Murray, he wrote an entire book on this phenomenon, Strange Death of Europe. He had he's got a column in this week's Spectator magazine. And the most recent example, that's the most recent, but last month, August, in America, they had a record number. I think it was I've written it down here, over 300,000 for the month, 20,000 people just last weekend, not this weekend, last weekend, 20,000 people.
Mind-boggling.
It is, but it's all part of the global. It's basically, there was a couple of sociologists back in the 1960s, Cloud and Piven. They wanted to bring down America, and they figured the way to do it was to overload the social welfare system. That is exactly what is in play right now. Yeah. It's the Cloud and Piven strategy. You can look it up, Cloud and Piven strategy.
Beijing would be very happy with the way this is being played out at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. But the whole thing is to break down the nation state as part of the crash the American society culture. Fortunately, here, we don't seem to hear much about boats or anything these days. So,
funny that.
Yeah.
I got to run. Jim, all right. Great to have you on. Thank you,
Thanks,
mate.
Chris. All right.
Fantastic.
Talk to you later.
Politically incorrect former radio king at night time across Australia, Jim Ball. I've got to take a break, and then we're going to have a mystery solved of sorts involving the most infamous bushranger in Australian history. This is TNT Radio.
With his expert analysis and opinion, this is TNT Radio's Timothy Shea.
America has been under assault from within by the Communist Chinese Party, not for decades, but for generations. It's no secret that for a long time now, the demographic group that has received the most number of PhDs awarded by American universities in advanced physics, materials science, electronics, and other high-tech disciplines has been Chinese nationals. They come here, they get their doctorate, and then they go back to China. Ohio State University has over 20,000 Chinese students, all of whom are members of the Red Army. But it doesn't end there. With the Confucius Institutes, CCP has tried to infiltrate and influence American education at the secondary and elementary school levels. That ended under the Trump administration, but with Stumblebum Joe, Katie bar the door. They're involved in everything, including lesson planning, school layout, curriculum development, and on and on and on. And it has nothing to do whatsoever with the fact that the Biden family has made tens of millions of dollars from the Communist Party of China and never bothered to disclose it on federally required forms or pay taxes on it. Consequences? Consequences are for little people. Don't be silly. From MAGAInstitute.com, this is Timothy Shea for TNT Radio.
I'm Ben Affleck, and I want to thank you for joining me and supporting paralyzed veterans of America.
I'm a quadriplegic. I'm definitely at risk.
I'm very concerned about would there be a bed for me? Would there be a ventilator for me?
Join me and help fight for them by supporting paralyzed veterans of America.
They're making sure that we have all of the food and supplies that we need right now.
To find out how you can help, please go to helppva.org. That's HELPPVA.org.
Where the story goes, we follow. Chris Smith on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
For those listening outside of Australia, a bushranger is an Australian convict who roams the countryside and commits crimes to stay on the run. And the most famous of those, or infamous, is Ned Kelly, a murderous bushranger who wore a steel armour as he faced the might of the Victorian police in a shootout at a little place called Glenrowan. He survived the shooting onslaught, but was later hanged inside Melbourne jail. However, the mystery of what happened to Kelly's skull has created, I guess, a separate legend, with tales of his remains being stolen and even intrigue over a lost grave. Well, best-selling author James Phelps has solved the mystery in his latest book, Australia's Most Infamous Jail, Inside the Walls of Pentridge Prison. James Phelps joins me now from Sydney. James, welcome to TNT Radio.
G'day, Chris. How are you, mate?
I'm doing very, very well. And I read this story this morning and I thought I knew you were working on this book and I knew it was coming out. This is incredible. Did you set out to solve this mystery?
No, not really, mate. I went into the book on Pentridge Prison looking for the best stories, and I came across a few crackers, mate, and none better than Ned Kelly and the missing skull and the missing grave.
Who did you speak with to try and uncover the truth of the whereabouts of his skull?
Mate, I spoke to a range of people, including the backhoe driver that dug him up, former Attorney General of Victoria, and mate, the main guy was Jeremy Smith, who was an archaeologist at the Victorian Institute of Archaeology. And, mate, he was an incredible guy. He was looking around that prison for almost 8 years, having no luck at all, and eventually he stumbled across the grave thanks to the backhoe driver, who decided he'd stop and not dig into what was in the ground, which was just a box, really. It wasn't.
So the backhoe driver wasn't doing anything to find Kelly. This was an entire accident.
No, mate, they were raising the prison, parts of the prison, to build a $1 billion redevelopment that now sits on top of the site. But everybody knew that there was a prospect that Ned Kelly could be buried somewhere on the ground. And I don't think they would have stopped for anyone else except for Ned Kelly. Yeah. So all the workers were excited, wanting to be the ones that, found Ned Kelly. So every time they stumbled across something, they'd ring up the archaeologist Jeremy Smith saying, "We might have something, mate." And obviously 99% of the time it was nothing.
In hindsight, it would seem quite amazing that his grave was not marked in some way, but he was as notorious at that time as anyone.
Well, it was marked, and that's the intriguing thing. His body was originally dug up and reburied at Melbourne Jail once, and then it was taken from Melbourne Jail to Pentridge, and they buried it and put a marked grave there. But at some point in history, and nobody knows when, it was dug up again for some sort of works, and a new mass grave was dug up and reburied, and no one actually recorded where it went. So that was the big mystery behind it.
So so this is a myth about Ned Kelly's skull being stolen, which of course was a story that did the rounds for many years.
Well, it wasn't a myth. This is another intriguing part. A skull from Melbourne Jail was actually stolen, and the skull that was stolen was in a glass case with the marking Edward E. Kelly. So for 100 odd years, everybody thought this was Ned Kelly's skull on display at Melbourne Jail. And this guy Tom Baxter's gone along and nicked it in 1978. And created a huge campaign and said he'd give it back if they gave him a proper burial. And, mate, he had it buried in a box under a tree in his property at Perth. The police tried to look for it, but obviously they couldn't find it. And he returned the skull amid this new search for Kelly's body. And, it wasn't.
And basically said, "I've got the skull."
Yeah, they did the DNA testing, and typically Australian, it wasn't even Kelly's skull. It was in the box all along, and it just disintegrated because they did phrenology on the skull after his death, looking for bumps to determine whether or not he was a psychopath, which was a great sort of science back then that obviously has fallen over now.
So could I now go and see the remains of his skull?
No, they've reburied him. So he's been buried in a proper grave now, and that's all on display. So people can actually, the funny thing is, for 50 years, people have been going to Pentridge Prison and standing in front of a grave thinking it's Ned Kelly, and there's actually nobody in there. So now they can actually go to Ned Kelly's grave and actually be certain that it's him underneath all the rubbish.
How funny is that? As you've witnessed when you've spoken to people around the Ned Kelly infamy, for Australians, we have this love-hate relationship with this bloke, don't we?
Oh, it's incredible. He's a celebrity. I've noticed that you mentioned him before, and you did a sing out to the international guests saying, who he is, but they should know who he is. Mick Jagger's played him in a movie. Johnny Cash has written a song about him. I mean, this guy's just huge all over. And in terms of Australia, I don't think he's infamous. He's almost a celebrity. He's a celebrity criminal. And the closest that we've gotten to that ever since is a guy called Chopper Read. And he was also in Pentridge. So Pentridge has produced two of Australia's most infamous criminals. And believe it or not, there was 12 convicts that were taken to Pentridge when it opened. One of the initial 12 I found in my research was a guy called Francis Christie, which doesn't really ring a bell, but obviously I'd written a book about this guy. It was Frank Gardner, who is Australia's most prolific bushranger and pulled off the biggest gold heist in history. And he escaped from Pentridge 3 months after he was there, changed his name to Frank Gardner, and ended up dying in Las Vegas with a fortune.
So his story is one of the other stories in this new book.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a fascinating book. We've got, as I said, we've got Frank Gardner, we've got Chopper Read, we've got Ned Kelly, and we've also got the real romper stomper, the guy that the movie was based on, that Russell Crowe played. And I've interviewed him. He's only been out of jail for 3.5 years, and he reveals what happened at the infamous Hitler's birthday party murder, which is just staggering. Just staggering.
I bet it's staggering. Well, at least we've solved one of those mysteries, and we now know that when we do go down to where the grave is, that we now can be certain that it is the remains of Ned Kelly, because we've been led astray for so many decades, mate.
Well, that's right. And mate, it's funny how many people are interested in bones and these sort of things. I actually got offered a signed picture of Charles Manson recently from a person I was dealing with, and I was like, no, I don't think I'm going to take that one off you, mate.
That is fascinating. Yeah, okay. Well, the book is called Australia's Most Infamous Jail, Inside the Walls of Pentridge Prison. How many separate stories do you have, apart from Kelly's?
Oh, there's a good 20 or 30, I guess.
Right.
I mean, it's just, it's a history of the whole jail, but I've picked out the most interesting people and most unknown stories, and, obviously given them a little bit more airplay than the rest. But, it comes out in a couple of weeks. It's already in the top 10, and it's still on pre-sale, which I'm pretty happy about. But if your listeners want to get a sneak peek, I've got some audio books up online that they can get at
let us know. How do we go there?
Yeah, Bookenstein.store. Jump in there. You can get the Ned Kelly story. You can get the Romper Stomper story. There's a whole heap in there.
Bookenstein.store. Okay, I thought that was store. Okay, good. Bookenstein.store for those audiobooks. That's fantastic. And your book, Australia's Most Infamous Jail, is on the shelves now?
Yeah, no, in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yep,
okay.
Yep, it'll be
in 2 weeks' time. So a great present for someone for Christmas. Like we love our non-fiction crime, don't we? We got a fascination with it.
We do, and I keep on writing about it because people keep on reading it. I'd like to go and write about something nice, but I'm always down a dark hole looking at bodies or interviewing people that kill people on Hitler's birthday.
Oh, fantastic. We'll be interested to see the book once it gets out, James. Congratulations once again, and all the very best with the success of the book.
Thanks heaps, Chris. Appreciate it.
No problem. James Phelps, Australia's Most Infamous Jail, Inside the Walls of Pentridge Prison. If you haven't done your Christmas shopping as yet, and I'm sure you haven't, well, maybe you haven't, there's one that you've got to put on the list. So it comes out in bookstores in 2 weeks' time, Australia's Most Infamous Jail, Inside the Walls of Pentridge Prison. Fascinating stories. And we are obsessed with true crime, aren't we? It's a genre of storytelling that we're attracted to. It doesn't matter. It's not an Australian thing. It's certainly not an English thing. It's something that we're attracted to as human beings. Stories that have the macabre nature about them, and the terrible streak of criminality. We just can't get enough of it. Quite amazing. And thanks to James Phelps for joining us. Very quickly, Neil says 100% of the Aboriginal councils need to be checked and audited. Well, as I said, Neil, imagine how non-PC that would be. Imagine how much you'd get bucketed for suggesting it, but that's exactly what needs to happen. We need to work out exactly where the money's going for the sake of those disadvantaged Indigenous people who aren't seeing the money. Good point. Thank you very much for the email. Thank you very much for your attention and listening today. We'll come back to do it again at the same time tomorrow. Dean Mackin is up next. Thank you so much for your time. This is Chris Smith on TNT Radio.